Hi, and welcome to template development number 2 in parallel line development. Now, to date, we've seen a lot of examples of prismatic or flat-sided objects, be it hexagons, squares, rectangles, etc. in both video. In fact, the rectangular section was in our last video. What happens if we have a round object, like a piece of pipe or a piece of tube? Well, here is development number 2. This is also in your packet. And you can see that this is a round piece of tube, basically with a 1/16 wall and with a frustrum cut line down at 33 degrees. And you can see that detailed on the top of the tube right there. Now, when we start thinking of like something with a 1/16 wall, we're going to start after making calculations and making our diameters and stuff different sizes. By that I mean that basically if we're working to a bend line, we're talking about half of the thickness into each side, which means that we've really got to take one thickness away from the 1.5 inches to give us a number that we multiplied by pi, because the development or the circumference of a circle is pi times the diameter, but it has to be the effective diameter. But just for now, we're going to get more practice when we start rolling out the forge body, the skin of the forge that goes around. When we start working on that, we're going to be developing it to where the true bend allowance should be, okay, which is halfway through the material. But for now, let's think of this as, and you can see there is no height on there. We're going to make that 4 inches. So we're going to make a rectangle 1.5 inches by 4 inches in height. It could be any height we want. We just need a piece of paper to wrap around a piece of pipe if we need to mark it out, or in this case, a piece of paper that we could pin punch through to develop out a pattern on a piece of flat sheet. Okay? So we'll make it 1.5 by 4. So without further ado, let's get this thing off and let's get started setting up our drawing sheet. So we're going to make a rectangle. I'm going to left click the rectangle when I'm ready. So I'm going to left click that and I'm going to place it on the screen. But first we've got something to do with our drawing screen. Now we need the snap on. Right, so that's this one down here. You can see I've got my snap on. Make sure yours is on. If you can see a grid, you're great. If I click it, you can see that's the grid going off and on. Right, so make sure it's on. Make sure that your snap mode is on. You can either click this button down here to put the snap mode off and on, or you can just press your F9 key. The grid is F7. The snap is F9, and if you want to make sure that your polar tracking is on, that should be blue as well, that one is F10. It's also going to be pretty important that your object snaps, this one here with the square with a little square in the corner, if I click it, right, it's going to be on. And the little caret to the side allows us to define what snaps we're looking for. It's important that you have the midpoint one, that's the second one down from the top, checked. Okay, you must have the midpoint checked. So you just left click on it and it will put a check mark on the left hand side. When you're done with that, left click the icon and the menu will disappear. So last thing of all, we've got the grid on, we've got the snap on, we've got the polar tracking on, is Z space A on the keyboard. That gives us zoom with all as a defaulted number, right, the defaulted letter. And then we hit enter. You can see that the grid itself resizes itself to whatever the default screen size is, and that's the virtual paper, if you like, that we're going to draw on. So let me go up now that we've got all that set up and click on the rectangle. And if you can't remember, but it's been a few minutes, we're just going to left click on the screen. We're going to do Shift and 2, which gives us the @ sign. Then we need the we need the width of the thing first, followed by the height. Okay, so it's going to be 1.5 inches across. So let me do, we got the at, I'm going to do 1.5, hit the comma in between to define it, and then 4, then enter. And that gives us the 1.5 inches in diameter and the 4 inches of height. Now the very last thing we're going to do on this before we start working on the bottom view is that we're going to put the frustrum line that's going to go through that left hand edge, so that we've got a good cut line all the way through the object. So let's go up and grab the polyline, because that's what we're going to draw it with. And we're going to go to the upper right hand side and left click. Now you can see if I pull out that line to the right, that it not only says there that I'm 1 inch away from that corner, it also said that my angle is 0. Remember that from a given point, it's the 3 o'clock mark, which is 0. And it's a positive number if I turn around counterclockwise, like if I go to the upright position. You can see it's 90 degrees now. If I go back towards the other corner, you'll find that I'm 2 inches out at 180 degrees. So if you want to bring this down further by another 33 degrees from this point, we're going to have to go down to 213 degrees. Okay? 213 degrees. That's 180 plus the 33. So let's go down to this bottom line, and we'll just give you a quick recap on how we actually detail this dimension. So first of all, we do Shift 2 to give ourselves an at sign, because it's at that point, or from that point, we're going to do the line. Then it's going to be the length, which in this case, we're going to make sure we go through that 1.5 inches by saying it's going to be 2. So it's at 2. Then we go Shift and comma on the keyboard. That will give us the left hand angle bracket. If you look over the comma sign, you'll see, in fact, the comma and the period sign, you would see the 2 angle brackets. We want the left hand angle bracket. So Shift, comma gives you the left hand angle bracket. Then 213 is the number of degrees, and we hit enter. At that point, we can do a right click and enter, and that's our frustrum line put on, and we can develop everything from there. Now I'm just going to move this up a little tiny bit. I'm just going to get the pan command from the right hand navigation menu and move it up a little tiny bit, because now we need a piece of room, because we're going to put a circle down here. And there's no point trying to place the circle. There really isn't. Remember that our snap that we're using is a 1/2 inch. This would be 3/4 inch. Now we'll be able to snap up 1/3 of the way, 2/3 of the way, and the full way. We need to get exactly the center point of this. Otherwise, the development upward of the lines we're going to make out will not work. It has to be drawn orthographically. It has to be drawn exactly where it needs to be drawn. All these developments do not work. So let me grab a polyline, and it's the reason why we wanted the midpoint detailed. And let me get somewhere near this thing. You can see that the midpoint does flash up. It's a green triangle. But as soon as you get anywhere near the edge, the triangle disappears. And the reason for that is we've still got our snap on. Okay, so let me just hit F9. Now I can get right down to the center point there, and you can see that's the green midpoint, right? So that's the midpoint command. You can see it on screen. I'm going to left click, and then I'm going to pull this thing down, and it doesn't really matter how far away you put it, but I'm just going to put it around about 1 3/4 inches away. I'm just going to left click it. Then you can right click and enter just to leave your line right there. Okay, next thing, we want a circle. I'm going to left click the circle. I'm going to bring this down here, attach it to the bottom of that line, left click, and then pull that thing out. Now, as I know that this width here is precisely 1.5 inches, I could just enter 3/4 inch, and it would do the same thing, right? Or it could come up to that corner, drop that line down, and place it right there. But if we're working to a thickness, and I'm working to the inside of this tube rather than the outside of this tube, and you will find that we do that occasionally. In fact, we do it on the forge, okay? Imagine turning around and halving a half of the diameter of the forge. So it's 13 inches, 0.98763, halved. Halved. It's ridiculous, right? So doing that and calculating out, pain in the butt. So if we can go down to this bottom bar here on the command line, we can either click the word diameter, then just enter the actual diameter we want. Okay, or you can see that one of the letters is in fact highlighted, capitalized in blue. If we just simply hit D, then enter, it will fire in that same command, and I'll show you from here. D, enter. I've just entered that on the keyboard. You can see the thing resizes somewhat, and then we enter 1.5, then enter. And now we have the correct size circle, strategically centered off the midpoint of the model. It is completely orthographic. Now we just get rid of that. Okay, so now we have the side view or front view on, and we have the plan view on of that circle. Our next task is to divide this circle up, and really the size of the circle and the amount of detail you want, how close you want it to be, is determined by the number of divisions. In the video example, they showed you doing 8 divisions and 12 divisions. Right, so we're going to do 12 because that is the standard number of divisions. Okay? Okay. So all we need to do is grab a polyline, come anywhere near that edge of the circle. You can see the green circle, the center comes up, and left click. Then we just need to go up to the top and see where we get the cross there on the top, and left click. Now we can right click and hit enter, and now we've got our one sprig on that we can now array around like we did with the groups of holes and things we were using last year. Okay, so the array command is up here. There's a caret to the side that will give you options of path, rectangular, or polar. We, of course, like last year, because we were putting circles of holes on, we will want to click the polar option. And then it wants to know the object. Well, it's the line we've just drawn. So we left click on the line, then we right click. It wants the base or the center point, the center of the array. It's the end of the line or the middle of the circle, whichever. It's going to be the same point, and left click. Now, just like with the circles, it puts on 6. It's the default. This one is copying this line into 6. We actually want 12. So if you look down on this bottom bar, you've got the items that I could click. Okay, so I could click that one. Alternately, you could just say I, then enter on the keyboard, 12, then enter. Or if you look at this whole array bar that's up the top here, we could simply go over here, change the items from 6 to 12, and then hit the enter key. Okay, now as soon as you click on the screen after that, it will change to 12. But 12 is the number of divisions we want, so we're good to go. We can close the array bar. Okay, so now we're back to our standard home menu. The last thing before we start making the actual pattern itself is to develop these bars, these points, these divisions on the round up through the frustrum point. Okay, so I'm going to grab a polyline and come down, because I do already have this outside line from the rectangle, left and right, that goes through where the frustrum point is. What we don't have is the ones in between. So I'm now looking at that being the first one. See, that is directly under the left hand side. So I'm going to do our line from there. And I'm going to bring it straight up past, so it goes even past the top of the rectangle. It doesn't matter as long as it intersects that frustrum line. So I'm going to left click there, and then right click and enter to end that line. Now once you've drawn the one line, All we need to do is hit the copy command, which is in the modify menu on the left hand side in the middle. Left click that right there, grab it by the bottom part, right, so that's the bottom of the line we just drawn, where we drew it from, and left click. I'm just going to zoom in a bit more to that, and then you can see I've got that ghosted line on the end of my crosshairs. So I'm now going to go down and drop it to each one of the spokes around there, not bothering with the outside because we've got the outside of the tube. Okay, so let me just move that down and zoom in a little bit more to it. Now you can see that if we count the two sides, we've developed 5 lines up through, plus the two sides is 7. That's the magic number for a division of 12, because it's half of the circle plus 1. Now some people say, why plus 1? Because if we split this thing open down one single line, both ends of the pattern are going to carry that same number. Like if we split it down to number 1, there's going to be a 1 on both ends of the pattern, because once you join them back up, the 1 is like in the same spot, in the same space. Okay, so that's the reason why there's an extra line. So the rest of this is pretty simple, but to keep this video to a decent length, we're just going to quit it here, and I'll join you again in part 2.